that it is the United States that has walked out of multilateralism. The United States walked out of the Paris Climate Agreement. The United States walked out of the World Health Organization. The United States does not pay its dues to the United Nations. The United States said, we oppose the Sustainable Development Goals. In our English cliche, that's like being opposed to motherhood and apple pie. We're opposed to sustainable development, to ending poverty, to fighting climate change. And when I say opposed, I mean the U.S. government is voting against UN resolutions that call for the Sustainable Development Goals because, as the U.S. spokespeople at the UN say, this is not in America's interest. So when the BRICS come out for the international system, yes, Donald Trump says, oh, that's anti-American, because the United States is absenting itself from the multilateral system. I have to say again and again, though, because we use these terms as shorthand, when I say the United States, I mean almost literally these days Donald Trump, one person, because Congress doesn't say a word. It's pathetic. As I said, the Supreme Court is basically saying, well, the president can do what he wants. And the American public has no say in anything. The American public supports the United Nations, as one opinion survey after another has demonstrated for decades. So we use shorthands of countries, but what we mean is governments. In most cases, governments are institutionalized. In the United States, of course, there is an institutionalized government. It's the deep state. It's the military-industrial complex, which really runs the U.S. government. And it's personalized in a president that doesn't rule by law or by legislation, but rather by executive order. This is even more true than just about any so-called authoritarian country in the world that I know of, where in most countries there's at least a ruling council or some kind of a group of governors of the provinces of the country or some such institution. But in the United States, it's one person right now that decides 50% tariff for Brazil, 30% tariff on this, we tax whatever. The whole international tax system of the United States being determined by one person, announced on social media. Extraordinary what's happening.
You just heard Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, economist, Columbia professor, and one of the most respected voices in global policy, deliver a shocking but undeniable truth. It is the United States that has walked out of multilateralism. And not just a little. The U.S. has abandoned climate agreements, withdrew from the World Health Organization, refuses to pay UN dues, and now votes against global goals like ending poverty and fighting climate change. And Sachs doesn't stop there. He says something most people are too afraid to admit. When I say United States, I mean Donald Trump, one person. Let's unpack what Sachs said, and why this moment marks a turning point in global power. Sachs starts with a hard truth. The United States has walked out of multilateralism. That's not conspiracy. That's fact. The U.S. pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement under Trump. It withdrew from the World Health Organization during a global pandemic. It refuses to pay its dues to the United Nations. And now, it votes against UN resolutions that call for ending poverty, fighting climate change, promoting sustainable development. Sachs calls it what it is. It's like being opposed to motherhood and apple pie, and yet here we are. This isn't just isolationism. This is anti-global cooperation, and it's being driven by a single man, Donald Trump, and the deep state behind him. Here's the real shocker from Sachs. The American public supports the United Nations, but Trump doesn't care. That's the key. The U.S. public wants global cooperation, climate action, poverty reduction, diplomacy over war. But none of that matters, because Trump rules by executive order not by law. He decides tariffs on Brazil with a single tweet. He decides U.S. foreign policy with a post on Truth Social. And when he does, Congress says nothing, and the Supreme Court does nothing. That's not democracy. That's personal rule. And Sachs doesn't hold back. This is even more true than in most so-called authoritarian countries. In Russia, China, or India, there's at least a council, a party, or a collective leadership. But in the U.S., it's one man, and that man is Donald Trump. Sachs makes a chilling observation. The deep state, the military-industrial complex, really runs the U.S. government. That's not just opinion. That's strategy. The U.S. may look like a democracy, but in practice, it's run by the Pentagon, the CIA, defense contractors, lobbyists for Israel and the arms industry. And Trump, he's just their face. He signs the orders. He tweets the threats. He takes the credit and the blame. But the real decisions? They're made in boardrooms and intelligence briefings long before he even sees them. And yet, the world still treats the U.S. as a rational actor. It's not. It's a one-man show backed by a shadow government that sees the world as a battlefield, not a community. Sachs nails the deeper consequence. When the BRICS come out for a new international system, yes, Trump says it's anti-American, but the truth is, the U.S. walked out first. That's the real story. The world didn't turn against the U.S. overnight. It turned because the U.S. turned against the world. Brazil, India, China, Russia. They're not rejecting the West out of spite. They're rejecting a system where one man decides global trade, one tweet changes foreign policy, one administration wrecks decades of diplomacy, and they're building an alternative, a multipolar world, one where no single nation, not even the U.S., gets to dictate terms. Here's the most alarming part of Sachs' analysis. This is even more authoritarian than most so-called authoritarian countries. That's not just a critique. That's a warning. Because when one man can decide the fate of global trade, sanctions, and even war or peace, the world becomes unstable. And when the military-industrial complex backs that man, the world becomes unpredictable and dangerous. Because this isn't just about tariffs or diplomacy. It's about who decides global stability. And right now, that decision rests in the hands of a man who rules by impulse, not by law. Sachs gives us a rare and honest look at the real forces shaping the world today. The U.S. is no longer a leader. It's a disruptor. And the world is responding. BRICS is expanding. New currencies are emerging. New alliances are forming. And the U.S. is being left out, not because others hate America, but because they hate what America has become. A country where foreign policy is decided on social media. Institutions are powerless. The public has no voice. And the military-industrial complex calls the shots. That's not leadership. That's imperial collapse. In conclusion, Dr. Jeffrey Sachs gives us a rare and unfiltered look at the real forces shaping U.S. foreign policy today. Not democracy, not institutions, not Congress, but one man, a deep state, and a global system that's already moving on without us. Stay tuned for more analysis right here on The Informed Perspective. Until next time, stay informed and think critically.
It is the United States that has walked away from multilateralism. The U.S. withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement. It pulled out of the World Health Organization. It doesn't pay its dues to the United Nations. The U.S. even opposes the Sustainable Development Goals, and that's shocking. To put it in a common English phrase, that's like being opposed to motherhood and apple pie. We're talking about ending poverty, combating climate change, and promoting sustainable development. Yet the U.S. government votes against UN resolutions supporting these goals. Why? Because, according to U.S. spokespeople at the UN, these things are not in America's interest. So when BRICS nations come out in favor of the international system, Donald Trump turns around and calls it anti-American. But the truth is, it's the United States that has removed itself from the multilateral framework. And I have to emphasize this point because we often use shorthand terms like the United States. But today, what that really means is almost literally one person, Donald Trump. Congress says nothing. It's pathetic. The Supreme Court has effectively said the president can do whatever he wants. And the American public, They've been shut out entirely. In fact, the American public overwhelmingly supports the United Nations. Opinion surveys have consistently shown this for decades. So when we say the U.S., we're often not talking about the people, we're talking about the government. And even more specifically, the president. In most countries, even those labeled authoritarian, there's at least some form of governing council, a ruling committee, or local provincial leaders with influence. But in the United States, we now have one man making unilateral decisions, setting tariffs, redesigning tax policy, and announcing international economic measures via social media. There is an institutionalized government in the U.S., but it's not Congress, it's the deep state. It's the military-industrial complex. And it's now personalized through a president who doesn't rule by law or legislation, but by executive order. This is, quite frankly, more concentrated power than in many so-called authoritarian regimes. One man can decide 50% tariffs for Brazil, 30% tariffs here, new taxes there. The entire international tax policy of the United States being crafted and announced by one individual on social media. It's extraordinary and deeply troubling what's happening.